ビデオ
For every decade, there always seems to be a genre of anime that defines it. The 90s had the magical fantasies, the 2000s had the slice-of-life harem series, and the 2010s have the still common Trapped in Another World series. But if the 80s had a decade-defining genre, it'd have to be the space opera. Hot-headed pilots, dashing space pirates, political intrigue, military virtues, melodramatic deaths, long-haired mysterious wastes praying for an end to the war, and the large-scale space battles set against the vast majesty of space that tied it all together. All were commonplace in the 1980s. And it's really no surprise considering that the most popular franchises at the time were Gundam, Macross, and Legend of the Galactic Heroes. But while those franchises still dominate the cultural zeitgeist, many other space opera franchises of that decade were inevitably forgotten, regardless of their initial success. And here's where the Gall Force franchise comes in. 1986 saw the release of Gall Force Eternal Story, and with it, the Gall Force Meta series. Based on a 3D photo novel that ran in a monthly model kit magazine Model Graphics, Gall Force tells the saga of a seemingly never-ending war between the all-female humanoid race of Solnoids and the amorphous Paranoids. The knowledge and appreciation of Gall Force Eternal Story and the Gall Force series as a whole has kind of been sequestered to just a small audience of dedicated retro anime fans. All the DVDs that Central Park Media brought over back in the 90s were, and still have been, out of print for years, and as of the time of this recording, it doesn't seem like that's changing anytime soon. This could be because Gall Force is stuck perpetually in the shadow of its far more successful sister meta series, Bubblegum Crisis, of which it shared most of its staff such as Katsuhiro Akiyama and our boy, Kenichi Sanada. Yet, analyzing the entire meta-series would be a long, lengthy process, so why don't we just start out small by discussing the first and most well-known of the series, Gall Force Eternal Story. Eternal Story is unique in not only is it the first of the meta-series, but also the only one of the films from the meta-series that could be considered its own standalone movie. It has a clear beginning, middle, and end with zero evidence of any sequel books. As far as it's concerned, it's the only Gall Force film in existence, and by God, we're gonna treat it like it's the only Gall Force film in existence. A truly good anime shouldn't have to rely on future materials to prop itself up and spackle over its own blemishes. It should be able to stand on its own 2 feet. So keep that in mind before you send me a comment about how a certain scene is actually good if I had taken the time to watch Scramble Wars or something. As far as this video is concerned, there is Gall Force Eternal Story and only Gall Force Eternal Story. The question this video is posing right here, right now, is whether or not Gall Force Eternal Story can be its own movie and not just one part of its own meta-series. And the long, lengthy answer to that question will be said as soon as the sentence ends. Before we get into all things nitty and gritty regarding Gall Force Eternal Story, here's a quick synopsis. During a heated space battle between the Solnoids and the Paranoids, the Solnoids are ordered to retreat to defend an important terraformed world named Chaos from the Paranoids. In the ensuing confusion, a damaged cruiser called the Starleaf is separated from the fleet with 7 of its crew members aboard: Captain Aluza, Second-in-Command Robbie, Officer Patty, Officer Pony, Officer Caddy, Ensign Newbie Rumi, and the brash, hot-headed pilot Luffy. Now that we got that joke out of our system, let us continue. After narrowly escaping the battle, the crew decides that their best course of action is to follow command's orders and rendezvous at Chaos. Along the way, members of the crew are picked off one by one as misfortune seems to find them in the form of paranoid forces, mysterious subterfuge, and alien ripoffs. Unbeknownst to the remaining crew members, they are actually part of a joint experiment by the Solnoids and the Paranoids to create a third race to serve as the mediator between the 2 races, lest the war end in mutually assured destruction. This is done via alien cell implants via the alien ripoffs, to which leads to this.
Robbie, get in here! I'm coming! Robbie? Ah! It just started turning into this!
And within minutes, this baby grows into a fully grown adult, which then signals both races to chaos to capture this new being. Rabi, ultimately realizing that the conflict would just inevitably continue regardless of who gets the new race, decides to end the conflict once and for all by locking the new being and the remaining survivor Rumi on a ship and setting the coordinates to a verdant neighboring planet called Terra. Rabi sacrifices her life by reversing the terraforming on Chaos, thus rendering it an uninhabitable wasteland and killing both the Solnoid and Paranoid leaders. And thus Gall Force ends, but not without one last twist.
Oh my God, I was wrong. It was Earth all along.
At first glance, Gall Force Eternal Story does appear to look a little rough around the edges. Nothing low budget or anything, but half of the animation has a very TV quality roughness about it.
Okay, this is the right flank, this is left. This is forward, so this one is...
Yes!
No! Retreat!
But then you get to the other half and it's simply incredible. Since the original story was built around intricate spacecraft models, they go all in making the spaceships look impressively detailed while still keeping within its budget. This makes the battles both in space and on the ground all the more visually pleasing. Epic fights with flourishes of Sakuga peppered in between, just pure excitement all around. The only flaw the animation has is in its character animation. Not only is this where most of the aforementioned roughness can be seen, but it's also kinda too moe in some parts. Like, it doesn't get too cutesy and cartoony, but for what's supposedly meant to be at its core a serious war drama, there's inevitably going to be some tonal clashing. The expressions are good for more comedic scenes or banter, but when a character is flailing around wall-eyed during a tense life or limb situation, it can be distracting. But I honestly can't be mad at the character designs themselves, especially when you get someone as masterful in the art of design such as Kenichi Sanada. Each girl is given a design that's unique and fitting of their personality. An example would be Rabi given a straight, sensible hairstyle complemented by her colorful earrings, showing us that she's professional yet still has a youthful streak about her. And it helps her stand in contrast to Luffy, whose punk hairstyle, facial tattoo, and athletic build shows us that she's a rough and tough hotshot pilot with an attitude problem. They are even color-coded so as to better differentiate all the girls and make them more recognizable and more memorable, and oh my god, it's a rainbow, would you look at that? Now all they need to be perfect is for them to be given rich personalities. Oh. The personalities of nearly all the girls are so one-note they might as well be Microsoft note-taking software. You have the hero, the leader, the best friend, the shy one, the mysterious one, and the cute annoying one that serves as the movie's designated comic relief.
After comparing your own body mass with the mass and caloric value of the food you're consuming, I'm forced to conclude that the quantities you're ingesting far exceed your physical requirements.
Why can't you just say I eat too much and leave me alone?
They have just enough personality to make them different, and that's it. They don't grow as characters or even do a whole lot to influence the plot through their actions. More on that later. The only one of the main cast who has a modicum of development is Luffy. She has the most interesting character position, being the only member of the crew who's not a Starleaf crew member. She has the most interesting personality, being an abrasive loose cannon who refuses to take anything seriously.
Take it easy. Real flying works up a sweat, so I took a shower. This crate's like an oven. What are you girls doing, baking cookies?
And she probably is the only member of the Starleaf given any hint of a backstory. She's an ace pilot who is given a medal for her actions in the field, and yet secretly holds no pride in that due to the fact that during those successful missions, many of her comrades were lost. Plus, she is a snack and a half. Luffy had the potential to be the best protagonist, or even secondary protagonist, but that all gets washed away immediately the moment the plot decides to leave her for dead. That's right, everyone, the most interesting and developed main character of this anime is also the first to die.
Grundy, it's you. At least you're not alone out here. That didn't turn out so bad, I guess. They might even make it to Chaos. That's best for them. Not everybody can be a hero.
So now Rabi has to fully commit to the role of the protagonist, and boy does the quality of the narrative take a dip at this point. Rabi is such a boilerplate protagonist, but has just enough of a personality that she can play off other characters well. And by other characters, I mean Luffy. Her interactions with Luffy, despite there being not many of them, are some of the best character moments of the film.
Maybe you deserve that medal. But maybe the real heroes died protecting you.
Here's what I think of medals.
But when Luffy, who I remind you again is the most fleshed out character of this entire cast, dies before even the halfway point of this movie, it leaves Rabi in quite of a lurch. Rabi is only as good of a character as the other characters she can interact with. But now that she's left with characters who aren't as developed as Luffy, she comes off as even more painfully generic as before. I wanted that one! But the thing is that Luffy's death could have worked within the narrative, even as it is shot here. But it didn't. Now, from the outside looking in, it would appear that Gall Force Eternal Story is a solidly built story. And it is in some areas, like having the opening be this huge space battle and delivering exposition of how this battle came to be through a propaganda speech over the comms link.
But our ancient enemies, the Paranoids, are determined to rob us of our new homeland.
We must continue to resist their treachery with the unshakable hope that we will ultimately prevail. My children, we must not allow them to conquer our new world.
Glory to mankind! Glory to mankind!
Or about how nearly all the plot twists in the latter half are built up and heavily foreshadowed by prior plot twists so they don't feel like they're coming out of nowhere, such as having an extended music video sequence of the girls dreaming of a mysterious male figure be foreshadowing for another act, and not just an extended animation sequence to pad out the runtime. But then there are just some story elements that don't work simply because they come too early. And here's where I talk about Luffy's death some more. Luffy's death could have worked if it had simply happened a little bit later. In the anime proper, the death of Luffy comes at the end of Act 1 when the crew needs to escape a group of paranoid fighters and are forced to leave a wounded Luffy behind who eventually succumbs to her wounds. This leads into Act 2 where the alien ripoff subplot begins, and the outcome of this is that Captain Elusa ends up getting killed and Patty ends up wounded by the aliens, an event that later leads to her quote-unquote pregnancy and the creation of the third race, thus leading to the birth of humanity. While both are integral to the plot, the latter being required to lead up to the ending, and the former required to literally insert the latter into the plot, the events would have been a lot better if they were switched around. There's very little preventing the experiment from being inserted earlier into the story, considering that the film begins with a giant battle with the Paranoids, so that still would be an optimal place to drop in that little plot point. And if there's one character who can't afford to be killed off to introduce the dwindling party angle of Gall Force, it would be Elusa. Her role in the story is to just be an authority figure who spouts off orders to her crew, and once she dies, Rabi takes over that role no problem. So if anything, killing off Elusa first would at least add some gravity to Rabi being forced to take over her captain's duties, as well as removing an ultimately redundant character. And with the two scenes switched, it would give Rabi and Luffy time to develop their relationship with one another. One's a responsible, lawful good bridge bunny, the other an angry pilot who doesn't play by the rules. And having them both gradually come to an understanding for each other would make their shared battle with the Paranoids a whole lot more believable and emotionally exciting climax for their relationship. Unlike in the anime proper, where they go from two bitter halves to sisters in arms in the span of one conversation.
Big hero. I'm not impressed by that medal.
You think I care?
I'll handle these guys. Get back to the ship.
Forget about me. You go back.
Shut up and do what I tell you.
The only issue with switching these events around is that it would remove the justification for the Paranoids attacking the Starleaf, which ultimately creates a huge plot hole and exposes the fact that the experiment with the Solnoids and Paranoids is quite stupid when you get down to it, because it's so chock full of variables and things that can go wrong that it's almost a miracle they even got their third race in the first place. But newsflash, every story in existence has plot holes, and the story's main role is to not fill up plot holes, but to get you lost in the experience. The best way you can get lost in a story is to make you care about the characters, and the best way you can do that is knowing when and where to use your characters and the moments they are allowed to be their characters. And that's why, while not making for a more structurally sound story, switching certain events around would actually make for a richer story. At the very least, it would have made that lengthy, really dead flashback to events that happened 10 minutes ago montage of Rabi mourning Luffy feel way more impactful, even if she was doing it while on the toilet. Oh Sonata, you rascal you. And in its want to construct a sound story, it ignores everything that would make the story stronger, including the plot. Okay, I might have confused some people with that last sentence, so it's time to go over the differences between story and plot. Story is the timeline of events that's present in any narrative, the narrative's most basic blueprints. Plot, meanwhile, is the information that explains to the readers why the events of the story happened and their dramatic, thematic, and emotional significance. Or to put it even more simply, story is there to answer how did these things happen, while plot is there to answer why did these things happen. Like I said before, Gall Force Eternal Story has a strong story from a structural standpoint with how it introduces, foreshadows, and weaves its plot points into the narrative. Some of these elements don't exactly hold up well when put under heavy scrutiny, but the story as a whole is well constructed in that it shows that it had a clear plan and results in a film that has a clear beginning, middle, and end. It's structured perfectly. Too perfectly. The big problem with Gall Force Eternal Story is that there is too much emphasis on the story and not enough emphasis on the plot. The characters in this story feel like they are following a script rather than being, actual characters with agency. The crew of the Starleaf are reactive characters. The story affects them, but not the other way around. Most, if not all the things the characters do in this anime is usually noticing something's off in the sector of the ship/planet, sending a team to go check it out, and ultimately stumbling on the next plot point. And that's pretty much it. But on the rare off chance a character does take action, it's because it's required for the story to move forward. And you better believe it can sometimes come off as completely contrived. The most egregious being Pony deciding to stay aboard the exploding Starleaf just so she can confirm her suspicions of Caddy being an android being sent by the Solenoid higher-ups to ensure the success of their mission.
I can't go with you. I have to know about Caddy. OX-11 has always been my friend. He'll tell me the truth. The Blossom's computer Exonon is tied in with OX-11's matrix. Caddy can't be an enemy or OX-11 would never protect her. Maybe there's something important I can find out. Something that'll help the Solenoid survive. Something that'll save you all!
And that's rendered completely pointless when Caddy shows up and reveals that she's an android sent by Solenoid higher-ups by sacrificing herself to ensure the success of their mission. So, Pony mostly just ended up dying simply because she's not a part of the story past a certain point. The only characters who take action in believable ways are Luffy, whose role in the plot overall is just to die and give our protagonist Rabi more character, and Rabi, who only takes action in the end thanks to Luffy's actions. And that's Gall Force Eternal Story's fatal flaw. It completely railroads the cast to the story rather than have them explore the story for themselves, and it makes the anime feel less like a rich narrative and more like a fun ride, which isn't bad by any stretch of the imagination, but I can't help but feel there's a lot of wasted potential being left on the screen. We could have had an epic, serious Space War story about a small crew caught up in a conspiracy by their own race, showing how the higher-ups of government view their soldiers as nothing more than faceless grunts who are only there to serve the means to an end. Instead, the anime itself just sees its cast as nothing more than faceless grunts who are only there to serve the means to the end. The cement to hold together the building blocks of a potentially bigger story. And that's why Gall Force Eternal Story doesn't really make for a good standalone film, because it's not interested in being a standalone film. Gall Force Eternal Story is a fun, enjoyable experience if you want well-animated space battles, but it nevertheless feels constrained by its position as being a prelude to a larger story. It's so focused on weaving a coherent story that's meant to set up a larger story that it completely stints on anything that would make the story feel more meaningful, like characters or themes. Does Gall Force Eternal Story work better as a part of a great narrative rather than a standalone piece? It could be possible, but that's the question that's best left for another time. Gall Force Eternal Story seemed to be focused on being a foundation rather than its own house. Therefore, while it can hold its own from a visual standpoint, it fails to hold its own from a narrative standpoint. It's a strong, beautiful foundation, but for now, That's all it's going to be.